All right, we're ready to go. All right, we are sponsored doubly for this month. Sponsored this month by Jeff and Chavbela Wald, Ili Nishmas Jeff's father, Mr. Roman Wald, Avram ben Shmuel, Zichron Levracha, and grandfather, Mr. Menachem Eisner, Menachem Mendel, Ben Mordechai, Zichron Levracha, whose yortzites were in Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and the Neshamas should have an Aliyah. Daf Yomi is also sponsored this month by Shmuli and Miriam Fuchs, Ili Nishmas Shmuli's mother, Bela Yenta Bas Chuna, Zichron Levracha, whose yortzeit is on Rosh Chodesh Iyar. May her neshama have an aliyah. And we are on Daf Samech Zayin Amud Aleph, and we were amidst some issues here. We're trying to figure out when the Beis HaMikdash owns grain, right? So at the point at which it becomes obligated to take Trumas and Maasros,
Who do they give it to?
So who do they give it to? So if they're obligated, if they're taking Trumas and Maasros, they don't have to give it to anybody, right? So therefore, there's no obligation. If they have challah, right? If they're in their possession, but the time of challah is when you're going to knead the dough together, so you don't have to give it to. They don't have to give it to anyone. What if a non-Jew owns flour, right? Owns crops, and they complete the production, or a non-Jew owns during challah? So we said by challah, it seems like by a non-Jew, right? There was subject to this argument, right? It could be that a Jew purchases that flour. As Ellie was mentioning to me as we were walking out, could be subject to a older machlokas, a bigger machlokas in Shas about whether a non-Jew has the ownership rights when he purchases land in Eretz Yisrael, or whether he's considered a temporary, not a complete owner when he owns some land in Eretz Yisrael. So, therefore, depending on how strong his attachment to the land is, that could create an obligation. So, let's go through our machlokas here. I'm not exactly sure the halacha in practice. I believe that we don't have to give Trumas and Maasros if it's owned by a goy, but I'm not 100% sure. But I wouldn't know. I'm not sure. But as far as our Gemara goes, right, we wanted to know is what about the obligation of challah as well? So we said that it doesn't necessarily they don't have to necessarily tie together, because we know that the pasuk says ariso sechem, their dough, means your dough, means that if it belongs to you, then you have to give challah. If it doesn't belong to you, you don't have to give challah. Whereas by non-Jews, it could be that we had digancha was coming to include also, if a non-Jew owned it, it would still be obligated in Trumas and Maasros. So we weren't sure, or we say that no, it makes no difference. The two things are connected. We weren't sure. That's what we're going to pick up with Amar Rava. Rava says, Yehei Rava de'echzeh bechelma. He said, I can't figure out, right, what's going to be the halacha here as far as the non-Jews with the challah is concerned. So therefore, I hope I get to see it in a dream. Hadar ma Rava, then Rava comes back and he says like this: Man de Amar meruach uvikochav poter, the one who holds that the completion of the grain, the smoothening of the grain, which is the last step when you pile up the nice completed kernels in the grain, when he says that if that is done in the possession of a non-Jew, that it is exempt from Trumas and Maasros, Gilgul Hovi Kochavim Potter, he's also going to hold that if a non-Jew owns the dough when it gets kneaded together, is also it's also not there's also no challah given for that. Man de Amar Meruach Hovi Kochavim Eno Potter, but according to the opinion who says that the non-Jew is not exempt, so then Gilgul Kochavim Eno Poter, so also the challah of a non-Jew is not. So he links the two of them together. That's what Rava wants to say. So that's where we got up to last time. Now pick up new stuff. Svei Rav Papa l'Rava. Rav Papa asks Rava the following question: Ove Kochavim shehifrish Peter Chamor. Let's say we're going to see other circumstances where non-Jews could be in possession of items when their sanctity increases or changes, or they become eligible for sanctity. And what's the halacha in those circumstances? Let's say a non-Jew, he separates a sheep, and he says this is going to be in exchange for a firstborn donkey. The rule is that if you've got a firstborn donkey, so then it has to have its neck broken. You cannot keep it. It has a holiness, just like all four firstborn things, since we left Mitzrayim.
When you pick the neck of the donkey, because of the permanent move,
it does, but you can't use it as a korban anyway because it's a donkey, right? So there's no that by itself is the biggest move that you can get, right? Yeah. But what you do is you exchange it for a sheep, right? That's the better thing to do. Then you exchange it for a sheep. Then you bring the sheep as a korban.
A donkey with a broken neck.
Well, it's not. You're right. You're supposed to, instead of breaking its neck, exchange it for the sheep. That way you don't have to. Thank you for clarifying that. And then the sheep goes as a korban, and the donkey is free to go. So that is what you said. Let's say this non-Jew does that. Or the challah, or he's making some dough and he separates some challah out. He's seeing his non-Jewish neighbors do this stuff and he says, this is a good deal. I like these kohanim also. And so I'd like to contribute. Modimo soshu potter. We let him know, you're not Jewish. You don't have the obligation to do this, right? You're okay. V'chalaso necheles lazarim. And the challah that he separates, non-kohanim can eat it because it's not really challah, right? Even though he was imitating it, it's not. Upeter chamor gozes ovedbo, the ovedbo. And as far as the sheep that he separated, that's really not consecrated. It doesn't have any status to it. So therefore, you can go ahead and shear that sheep and use that sheep like you would any other type of sheep, any other sheep. Now, when this Bryce is talking about which things that rules, this Tosefta is telling us what rules, it leaves out one. It doesn't talk about Truma. It just talks about its challah. It talks about the Bechor, ha Truma so asura, which means that if a non-Jew were to set aside Truma and say, this is my Truma, it would seem to be that it would be prohibited. Now, this haitana damei murach ove kochavim eno poter. That means that this Tana is the one who holds that his truma is, in fact, he's not exempt from giving truma, and gilgo ove kochavim poter, but his challah he is exempt from. So Rava, you said the two things are tied together. If he's obligated to give truma, he's obligated to give challah. If he's not obligated to give truma, he's not obligated to give challah. So how do you understand this, where he's not obligated to give challah, and he is obligated to give truma? Ve'od osivei Ravina l'Rava. And now Ravina piles on, and he asks Rava, chalas ove kochavim ba'aretz, if you've got challah of a non-Jew in Eretz Yisrael, and from grain that grew in Eretz Yisrael, utruma so b'chutz la'aretz, and the truma that he has that comes from grain that grew outside of Eretz Yisrael. Modino so shu pater, we let him know you're exempt. You don't have to do that. Chalaso ne'cheles lazarim, his challah can be eaten by non-kohanim. Utrumaso eina midamas, and his truma doesn't create any sort of doubts as far as demai is concerned. Right? If you mix it together with other grains, there's no sanctity to it, and you're perfectly fine. So now, what did we just say? The challah is not challah. The truma is not truma, but only under one condition: if the grain didn't grow in Eretz Yisrael. So hot truma so ba'aretz, what will we derive from there? What would be if the grain grew in Eretz Yisrael? We would have to presume that since the Bryce is making it clear that this is the halacha, when the grain grew outside of Eretz Yisrael, that if the grain in fact did grow inside of Eretz Yisrael, asura umidamas, that it would be prohibited. It would in fact be truma. The non-Jews designating it as truma would in fact work. And it would create these problems of mixtures of truma if it mixed together with other things. Now, the high Tana, how are you going to see this? Let's take a step back and look at the entire picture of what this Tana is holding. Damar meiruach ovi kochavim eno poter. He says that the grain is not exempt from truma because they're going to bring truma. Gilgul ovi kochavim poter, but the challah that he makes doesn't work. It's not challah. So again, you see the discrepancy. So you clearly see those two positions are not linked. So the Gemara says that no, midirabanan. Really, the goy is not obligated. According to this opinion, the reason why Rava says the two things are linked, they are linked. If you're not chayev in challah, you're also not chayev to give truma. So why is this non-Jews truma? The answer is rabbinically. We made a gezerah derabanan, a gezerah mishum bali kisim, because of the rich guys. Rich guys are always trying to cheat. They always have a way to try to get out of paying their taxes, right? That's the way that it works. And so that was what they were doing. The rich guys why? Because their taxes are high. So they are motivated to figure out ways to get around it.
Don't use TurboTax for those ones.
So what they did was I don't know if they use Truma tax. I thought you said TurboTax, right? Truma tax. So what they did was, like we do by Chametz on Pesach, they sold their crop to non-Jews, completed the process, and then got it back from the non-Jews, hence avoiding all Truma and Meiser obligations, because it was in the possession of a non-Jew when it became finished. So therefore, exactly. But it's I say there's so many the tie-ins to Pesach and all of these things. There can be 100 of them. Wow. It's great. It's great. So when doing Daf Yomi, you see all the connections to Pesach, right? It's the same idea, right? Give it all to a non-Jew, then you're passer from Trisman. So the Chachamim said, we see these guys cheating on their taxes. Therefore, midirabanan, the non-Jews are still obligated in Trumas Meiser. They're not going to benefit from it. So ihachi, if that's true, afila chalanami. So then why don't we worry about these rich people cheating on their taxes and not giving their challah also? They'll give it over to the non-Jews and the non-Jews won't be obligated, and why wouldn't we worry about that also? So the answer is, after de apile, pachos mechameshes revoim kemach va'od. So he says, well, if they really wanted to get out of it, they had other simpler ways to do it. And that is that you can do small batch baking. Right? You don't have to make 5 pounds of challah in order to be chayav in challah. You could do small batch baking and get out of it, right? So therefore, there was the easier way, and so therefore, if they really wanted to get out of it, so they said we're not going to worry about them. They're not going to give it over to a non-Jew in order for him to knead the dough when you have a simpler way around it. So truma nami. Well, what are you talking about? There's another simpler way around truma as well. And yet they prohibited non-Jews. What was that? Efshar da'avid la k'Rav Oshaya. You could do the trick that Rav Oshaya pointed out. Dama Rav Oshaya said, Marim Odom al Tvo. So a person can play a trick with his grain and not be chayav to give trumas and maasros. Umachnisa b'motz shela. The Torah tells us that it's obligated in trumas and maasros when you have your completed product and you bring it into your storehouse. So he says, when you bring it into your storehouse, don't have it completed. If you bring it into your storehouse while it's still in its husk, and then complete the process inside the storehouse, it's exempt from Trumas Meiseros. Loophole, right? Kedei shetehei behem tohu chelas. Now, he's bringing it in the husk. Why? I mean, it's not complete. No, it could be used as animal fodder that way. So he's bringing it in as animal fodder. Then uptur min meiser. Then when he finishes the process and he separates out the grain, the kernels, it's now exempt from Trumas and Meisers because it was animal food. Animal food is not chayav in Trumas and Meisers. Inami, or another way to get around it, is da'ayil lo derech gagos. He can have a skylight, and he can bring the grain in through the roof, because the obligation only exists when it comes through the door. So if you can create a skylight system, you can bring it up through the roof. You can be exempt from Trumas and Meisers. So why, if the rich people were looking for ways to avoid their taxes, right? Why did we presume that the way that they were going to do it was with a non-Jew when there were all these other opportunities as well? And we were fine with these other opportunities. We were fine to look at these other opportunities when it came to challah and thought, they're probably not going to get a non-Jew. Hasam, no, befar hesia. If you do those other methods, everybody's going to see you. Right, you drive by this guy's industrial complex, and he's got a big roof. He's got a big, like the Toronto Sky Dome opening up there for him to drop his grain in. Everybody's going to know that he's going around his taxes, and word's going to get around, and people are not going to.
Of course, you have to use a chopper to drop it in.
So therefore, exactly. So therefore, people are not going to appreciate that, and they're going to know he's cheating his taxes. So zila be milsa, right? It's a little embarrassing, so he won't do that. So therefore, he decides, you know what? I've got a simpler. My non-Jewish worker who's doing the work anyway, I'll just say it's yours, and nobody will know the difference, and that's the way they'll do it. Hacha, but here by the challah, if he bakes in small batches, bitzina v'lo zila be milsa. That's private. Nobody knows he's doing that, right? So therefore, he'll try to get away with that. So therefore, that was a acceptable method of getting around the challah problems. But really, Rava is correct. The two positions are linked. If you're exempt from Trumas and Meises, you're exempt from challah. If you're obligated, the ones who hold you're obligated, say you're obligated. Says the next Mishnah. Bolo li'isar. Back to the Korban HaOmer, which is the Inyan at hand, and literally it's at hand. So we're going to need to know how to do this coming up. So bali isaron. So now they've grinded up all of the grain and they've got it down. They've got all this barley down to the size of the isaron. Nasan alav shamno ulevonaso. Then you add the oil to it and you add the frankincense to it. Yotzak, you pour the oil on. Ubalal, and you mix it up. Heinif, then you wave it. Vehigish, and then you touch it to the corner of the mizbeach. Kamatz, then you take the kmitza. Vehiktir, and you burn the kmitza. V'hashar ne'echol l'kohanim. The leftover that's in there, that's in the container, can be consumed by kohanim. Great. Mishakarav omer. Now, what happens? Once the omer is brought, yotzin umotzian shuk Yerushalayim shehum yotzin. Then you go out to the streets of Yerushalayim. Umotzin shuk, and you'd see in the shuk Yerushalayim, in the marketplace in Yerushalayim, shu malei kemach. The flour is everywhere. Everybody's got all kinds of. Because remember, they were selling. All of a sudden, the new storehouse opens up, and now everybody's got. I guess they had left whatever was left the day before was like empty. Now all of a sudden, everything opens up. So it's malei kemach, kali, and it's got dried parched kernels. Shelo b'ratzon chacham, and the chacham did not like this. The chacham were not pleased with it. We'll see why. Because how do you get flour? The second it's permitted, right? Imagine the pizza store opens up like 2 minutes after Shabbos is over. When did they make the pizza? They made the pizza on Shabbos, right? So it's a problem. You got to make sure that the pizza opens up.
What's the Pesach when a lot of people wait in line?
So you got to make sure there's enough. So what happens here is you open up the shops and you see all the flour here. When did they make the flour? They must have made it yesterday. Now, is that a problem? We're going to see it might be a problem. We're worried that people in the process of using the new grain might eat the grain while they're making, right? That's what happens when you're working. You'll consume it.
Before they put in the freezer.
You can't make it before because it's chadash until that day, right? It becomes unable. It's not yoshan until that day. So they couldn't. There would be a problem no matter what you did. So they were doing it. So he says it's shelo b'ratzon chacham. Different Meir. Rabbi says that. Rabbi Yehuda says b'ratzon chacham. No, they did it. The chacham were fine with that. It wasn't a problem. We'll see the reason for their disagreement. Says the Gemara. Lo gazer Rabbi Yehuda dilma asi lemeichal minei. 1 second. What is Rabbi Yehuda saying? Rabbi Yehuda is saying we're not really worried if they're going to make all the produce, right? You walk out and now the produce is permitted. So what's the problem? The answer is you started making it last week. You had to grind up all the flour in order to have all the flour ready. You started to grind. Well, aren't we worried that you're going to eat it? Rabbi Yehuda says no. We don't worry about it. You're not going to eat it. That's all. Why are you suggesting Rabbi Yehuda doesn't worry about that? Or a minute, here's a contradiction. Rabbi Yehuda says. Bodkin or Arbar. So when we check for chametz, on the 14th of Nisan at night. Okay? Ba'arba asar shachris. If you don't, let's say you forget to check at night. So the next morning you get up, check your house for chametz, right? B'sha'as habiur. Then you go, I forgot to check that morning. You take a look at your watch, 10:14 or whatever the time is this year for checking for getting rid of the chametz. Check your house at that time. But and then after that. That's it. Don't check anymore. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say don't check anymore? Because if you check, you might find some, and if you might find some, you might eat it. Once it's time, so therefore, once it becomes time for you not to eat it, then don't check anymore. That's what Rabbi Yehuda's sheet is. The Chachamim say no, lo badak if you don't, etc. If you don't check, keep checking. Go check. You walk into a hotel room in the middle of Yontif, right? And on Chol Moed, check your cabinets. Whatever you see there, you get rid of, right? So you check. You could check even during Chol Moed, after the Yom Tov, right on Pesach itself. You could check. You could check at any time, says the Chachamim. So Amar Rabba says Shani Chada. So why is it Rabbi Yehuda says we're not worried? We're not worried. He says we are worried that you're going to come eat it. And then Rabbi Yehuda is saying we're not worried you're going to eat it. It's fine for the Chadash, but when it comes to Chametz, he says don't look around for Chametz. You might eat it. So why? He says Chadash is different. Why? Mitoch shelohi tirta lo. Al yedei zacharhu, because the people who were preparing it in a non-normal way. We're going to see that there's actually a Torah prohibition. What's two different things, right? One is checking for chametz. One is new wheat, right? There are two different prohibitions. Eating chametz is a prohibition. Eating chadash is a prohibition. So therefore, we're worried that if we allow you to work with chadash, you might eat it. Where we're not worried about that, but we're worried at the same time that if you touch chametz, you will eat it. So that's the contradiction. So he says that the reason is because since there's a prohibition of harvesting the grain in a normal way, so how did they get this grain? The answer is they harvested it in a non-normal way, meaning they plucked it with their hands. Normally you go around with the scythe and you chop it down. They had to harvest with their hands. Since they were harvesting this grain with their hands, so then nobody was going to eat it. There was a recognition. It was a reminder in and of itself not to eat it. They were doing it in an unusual way. So Amar le Abaye. So Abaye says, Tinach kitsira. Okay, fine. I get what you're saying if you're talking about the harvesting, right? Harvesting was done in a different way. Tchina v'harkada ma'ikal meimar. But then you got to grind it. Then you got to sift it. I mean, that's going to be the same, right? So then it's already plucked. So how are you going to prevent people from just tasting a little bit while you're grinding and sifting it? So halo kasha, it's not a contradiction. Tchina, even they added on stringencies there. When they ground it, berechaya diyoda. They didn't grind it in the normal way using, let's say, a water mill, right? That's how they would grind large industrial, right? They would have you see the big water mills with the water goes by and the wheel is turning and that turns right? So that was the industrial method that they would use to grind lots of grain. Here, you had to use your hand mill in order to grind it. Since you're using a hand mill, people go, something's different about this, and they won't eat it. And the sifting, al gabe nafa. You had to take the sifter and turn it upside down. Use the back of it, sift it through upside down. So there were clear recognizable things you were doing differently that made it understandable that you weren't going to eat it. Okay. But by the chametz, you're just going to walk around your house, open up cabinets, and find a donut. You might eat it. Okay, so that's why we don't allow you to search for chametz after the 6th hour. Beis hashlachim. But what about now? Beis hashlachim. A beis hashlachim is a irrigated field. It's in a valley. It doesn't get enough rain. So therefore, in order to be able to produce crops there, you need to water it. The crops are not as good. Therefore, they are ineligible as being used in the korban ha'omer. Right? Can't use them as korban ha'omer. Therefore, since you can't use it as korban ha'omer, the prohibition, which we're going to learn in a couple of pages about not harvesting barley before the korban ha'omer, doesn't apply to it. So when it comes to a beis hashlachim, desharya ktira, it was permissible to harvest it in the normal way. Ditnan, as we learned in a Mishnah, kotrin beis hashlachim sheba amakim. You can go ahead and harvest the beis hashlachim, the irrigated fields in the valleys. Aval lo godshin, but we don't pile the grain up, right? We're not supposed to make it into the haystacks, right? We don't pile it up. So Michael Amemar. So now, how are you allowed to harvest it? Aren't you worried that somebody's going to eat some of it? I mean, how are you going to explain that? So Ella Amar Abai, so Abai says no. I'll tell you why Rabbi Yehuda is not worried about eating chadash, and he is worried about eating chametz, because chadash bedil minei, but chametz lo bedil minei. Chadash, the guy's going to stay away from. Why? He was never allowed to eat this new produce. Chametz, yesterday he was able to eat it. He's not going to separate it from it. He's not thinking, right? This is a donut, he's going to eat it. But chadash, he's going to go, this is the new stuff, I'm harvesting the new stuff, can't eat it yet until the... So he'll remember there's a difference. That's why Rabbi Yehuda says, worry about chadash. He says, don't worry about chadash, but worry about chametz. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, Rav says to Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda kasha, we've been worrying all this time about the contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda, right? That he says, we don't worry about chadash, but we worry about chametz. The Rabbanan lo kasha, why aren't you worrying about the Rabbanan? The Rabbanan said, Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah says, that we are worried that they're going to eat the chadash. And then the Chachamim, when it comes to chametz, we presume Rabbi Meir is one of them, says, go ahead and search for chametz at all times, we're not worried that you're going to eat it. Well, why? Where's the inconsistency there? Where's the consistency, right? We see the inconsistency. Elam Rava says, Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha. So we said Rabbi Yehuda is not a contradiction, Kiddush unless we already explained. It makes a difference. You're going to stay away from your chadash. You're not going to stay away from a chametz. D'Rabbanan lo kasha. It's also not a contradiction between the rabbis because hu atzma mechazar loveless offer. Why are you looking for the chametz? You're looking for it so when you find it, you'll destroy it. So achal minei. Why would you eat it? Right? I'm searching for chametz. Oh, I found the donut. Oh, it looks delicious. No, if I'm searching for it to destroy it, I find the donut. I'm going to put it in the bag and throw it in the fire. I'm not for sure not going to eat it. So therefore, that's what I say. But chametz, they're not worried about it. By chadash, they're getting it ready to eat, so you might eat it. So that's why. Rav Ashi goes another answer. He goes, Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha. Coffee. Enjoy. Needs some coffee.
Make you another coffee.
So Rashi says Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda is not a contradiction. Kemach v'kalitnan. What's going on here is they're making flour and they're making parched grain. That's not edible stuff. Nobody goes and grabs a handful of flour. A donut you eat, right? So Rabbi Yehuda says stay away from the donut, right? But as far as a bag of flour is concerned, nobody's worried that you're going to eat a bag of flour.
There's even a warning on the bag.
That's right. Don't eat it. I didn't even realize. Okay, good. It's good. Baruch Hashem. So Rabbi Yehuda got on the bag of flour. It's good. Now, Vahad Ravashi Barusahi, but Ravashi's answer isn't really a great answer because Tinach, we call it an outside answer. It's an outside answer, not the best answer. Because Tinach Mikali Ve'elach, I get it. You've harvested this fresh barley and you toast it. Now you got this toasted grain that really isn't edible until you bake it into something. But Ad Kelly Ma'iklo Meimar, but until you toast it, it's fresh grain. Somebody could eat it at that point. You're still handling it. So therefore, you still have problems. So, okay, if you're going to say that's fine, al yidei kituf, we already explained that you're plucking it and you're doing all kinds of you're handling it differently all that time. Ukide Rabba, like Rabba said, Beis HaShlachin. What about the Beis HaShlachin case? We said, Desharia Ketira, we said you're allowed to harvest it normally. Michael Amimer. How are you going to explain that? Ella, Had Ravashi Barusi. So Ravashi's answer isn't the best answer. So, of all the answers. But we see distinction, and we got some extra chametz rules, some extra chametz conversation in here as well. Says the next Mishnah. Misha Karav HaOmer, once they brought the Korban HaOmer, Hutar Chadash Miyad. The Chadash is now permissible 100%, and you're allowed to eat all the new grain. Harachokim, people who are far away from Yerushalayim, they didn't know when the korban was being brought. So, mutar mechatoso yom ulahalan. At noon, they were allowed to start eating theirs because they could presume that the people in the Beis HaMikdash had done it by noon. Now it's interesting. They bring the korban homer after the musaf. Musaf wasn't usually brought until around noon, so we derive from there that potentially the korban musaf was offered earlier on the second day of Pesach, so that they would get to the korban homer earlier. But bottom line is the korban homer was done before noon, so everybody outside was able to start eating their new grain after noon. Mishacharav Beis HaMikdash. Now, once the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. We say Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is the person who makes all of these laws. Once the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, he makes the Zecher LeMikdash rules, right?
The first and second Beis HaMikdash.
The second Beis HaMikdash. So once the second Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, he realized this might be a galus that's a little bit longer than the first. So we're going to have a bunch of rules that are Zecher LeMikdash, things that we don't need to do nowadays, like counting Omer and such, but we're going to do it anyway to remember the Korban HaOmer that we had. But that's not one of his, right? He's eating more, a lulav, for example. Yes, there are a few of them. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, Yom hanef kulo aser. The day that they would wave the Korban HaOmer, which was the 16th, don't eat the whole day, right? Let's see why. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo min Torah hu aser. Why does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai have to come along and say that you can't eat the Omer the entire day? After all, the Torah says so. Namar ad etzem hayom hazeh. The pasuk says that you're not allowed to eat chadash until the entirety, until the main part of the day, meaning the whole day. Chadash is prohibited to eat. So therefore, you're not allowed to eat the chadash until the end of the day anyway. So, mipnei ma rechokim mutar. Let's go back to this point, and why are the people who are far away allowed to eat at noon? Know that Beis Din is not lazy. They're going to take care of it on time, and therefore you can rely on them.
Debatable if Beis Din being lazy.
Beis Din is not. This is where they know. They know it says so. Next says the Gemara, Rav u'Shmuel Damar Tavayu. Rav and Shmuel both say, Bisman shebeis hamikdash kayim. Now we're going to discuss what's the difference in Chadash on this 16th day. When can you eat it? When can you not? Especially now that there's no Beis HaMikdash. So Bisman shebeis HaMikdash Kaim, when there was a Beis HaMikdash, Omer Matir, the Korban Omer was permitting you to eat Chadash. It becomes Yashan. You're not permitted to eat Chadash, it just becomes Yashan. Bisman she'ein Beis HaMikdash Kaim, now that when there's no Beis HaMikdash, Kayim Heir Mizrach Matir. Beis HaMikdash Kayim, once now there's no Beis HaMikdash, Heir Mizrach Matir. Now it's Heir Mizrach, Rashi says, from sunrise. Right, even though there's Olos HaShachar, there's most of the time, he says, because why? Mefarshim comment, because it does say in the pasuk Etzem Hayom Hazeh, it has to be daytime. So he says, once daytime starts, according to Rav and Shmuel, once daytime starts, you get sunrise. Now the Chadash turns to Yashan, and you're allowed to eat it. I don't know if it's a good question whether the issue is a din of mixus yom kekulo or just ad ve'ad bechlal, ad ve'lo ad bechlal. Right? It says that it does say. Right, ad etzem hayom hazeh, right? So ad velo ad bechlal means that it's up to the beginning of the day, right? So as soon as the day starts, I think that's what it is, right? So up until the beginning of the day. Once the day starts, then it's new. So my taima, trek koiksidi. Pasuk says two different things, two different psukim. Ksev, it says, as far as eating chodosh, ad haviyachem, you're not allowed to eat it until you bring the korban. Uksiv ad etzem hayom hazeh, and it also says until the day. So ha'ketzad, how do you fulfill both psukim? Which is it? They're contradictory. Kan bisman shebeis hamikdash kayam. One is when there's a beis hamikdash, then you wait till the korban is brought. Kan bisman shebeis beis hamikdash kayam. You get up in the morning, there's no beis hamikdash, then it's immediately permitted at the beginning of the day. Now, that's what Rav and Shmuel says. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, it's always interesting, Rav and Shmuel usually argue with each other. Rav and Shmuel are on the same team. And Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish usually argue with each other. Now Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they're on the same team.
On the red team with the blue team.
Sorry?
On the red team with the blue team.
Bavel versus Eretz Yisrael, very good. That's exactly what's going on. Bavel versus Eretz Yisrael. So Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, Damri Tavayu, both of them say, Avila bisman shebeis hamikdash kayim, heyer mizrach matir. Even when the Beis Hamikdash was around, when it got to be morning, the chodosh was permissible. 1 second. How are you going to explain the pasuk? The pasuk says, ad haviyachem, it's supposed to be until you bring the korban, lemitzvah. That's not li'kuva, that's lemitzvah, means ideally don't eat it until you bring the korban. But really, if you do use it beforehand, it's not aser. It's a mitzvah to wait. Misha karav omer huter chodosh miyad. Now, the Mishnah says, once they brought the omer, then the chodosh became permitted immediately. So that sounds like it was dependent on the korban. The answer is, lo, the mitzvah. Again, that's also mitzvah, the mitzvah to wait till then. Now, we learn later on, ha'omer haya matir b'medina, shtei alechem b'migdash. The rule was that the korban ha'omer was permitting everybody in the whole country to eat the new grain, and in the Beis Hamikdash they still used the old grain until the shtei alechem on Shavuos. Once they used the shtei alechem on Shavuos, then they could use the new grain in the Beis Hamikdash as well. Right? It's a two-step process: the omer and then the shtei alechem. So what does it seem to be is that it seems to say that it's the korban that permits, supporting Rav and Shmuel. No, again, lemitzvah. That just means it's ideal to wait. Sameches amabeis. Misha charav beis hamikdash. Once the beis hamikdash was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, his kid Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai established sheyom hanef kulu aser, that the entire thing should be prohibited. Now, my taima. What is the reason why he established that rule? So he says, Mehera Yibana Beis Hamikdash, where we're thinking, the Beis Hamikdash is going to be rebuilt, right? And then, V'yesh V'yomru, and people are going to say, what did we do last year? Ishtakid Milo Achalnu Behe Mizrach, it came to be sunrise, and we started to eat the new grain. So, therefore, Hashta Nami Nechol. And this year also, we can also eat it at sunrise. V'luyadi, people will not realize the ishtakad because the halachas have changed. Last year, lo ha'eva omer. Last year there was no korban omer. That's why. Heyer kol mizrach matir. Therefore, when the sun rose, it became permissible. The hashtadika omer. Now that there's a korban omer, new Beis Hamikdash is back. So omer matir. Then the omer is going to permit. Therefore, that's why Rabbi Yochanan made his rule. Right? He's made his rule. We wait till nightfall because next year we might have a problem, so therefore Rabbi Yochanan took care of us, so we wouldn't make a mistake. Now, if you're saying the only reason we're not eating the omer during the day is a mitzvah, so then misha mitzvah leikum v'legzor, we don't make a gezerah, a rabbinic enactment to prevent people from not fulfilling the mitzvah. To say that we're trying to prevent somebody from doing an aveira, I get that, right? We're going to wait till nightfall because next year you'll make a mistake and you'll eat it early and that'll be aser. Okay, I get why you're making the takana. But what's so bad if they wake up in the morning and they eat the new grain? So they didn't get the mitzvah of waiting. Okay, not the most terrible thing in the world. They didn't get that mitzvah. But to make a gezerah about that wouldn't make sense. So it's clear, right? The takana of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai clearly establishes that it was an aveira. It's not a mitzvah. So therefore, it's a good question against Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai beshitas Rabbi Yehuda Amra. That Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he's you can't learn from him at all because Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he really is in the camp of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah told us that not only is it prohibited to eat the chodesh during the day, but you can't even eat the chodesh all the way until nighttime. The whole day is prohibited, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So that's a whole different camp altogether. That's why Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says you can't eat the grain even when there's no Beis Hamikdash around. You have to wait till nighttime. Damar mina Torah aser. He says that the Torah, to eat a grain on the 16th when there's no Beis Hamikdash is prohibited from the Torah. It's aser. Now, when it's a matter of whichever comes first. If, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if the korban is brought, so now it's permissible. If there's no korban, you got to keep waiting. Gets to be nighttime, and now you're allowed to eat it again. Okay, so therefore that's what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is talking about. So it doesn't really ask a question. Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan were going in the other shita that said that you could eat it at sunrise. Okay, Shenamar, how come? Because the pasuk says ad etzem hayom hazeh, until this day, ad itumo shel yom, until the main part of the day, v'kasavar ad ve'ad bichlal. And Rabbi Yehuda is holding up until means up until and including. Right? If I say we're going to count to reference an old movie, we're going to count to 3. Right? 1, 2.
Which movie was this again?
Lethal Weapon. Anyway, that's an old right? Right? Wait, when it's on 3 or after 3? So that's the old machlokas ad v'lo ad bichlal, right? So it's right? 1, 2. If you go 1, 2, 3 and then go, or do you go 1, 2 and go on 3? Right? So it's ad v'lo.
Now I got the scene.
Okay,
Thank
right?
you. Got it.
So v'lo.
Good old memory. The good old
Now I
memory.
got it.
Anyway, this is the issue. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you include the day. It's still aser until this day means until this day is over, and everybody else was holding until this day, until the day begins. That's what I think the argument is about ad velo ad b'chalali.
Even in the movie or just in general?
Sorry,
Even in the movie or in general?
the movie is all.
Yeah.
The movie is youthful folly, but this is where it becomes real, right? Okay. Mi savar la kevase. Right now, 1 second. How could you say Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that it's prohibited from the Torah to eat chadash all day long when there's no Beis Hamikdash? V'hamiflag poligale. Read the Mishnah. The Mishnah says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a rabbinic establishment to make it prohibited, and Rabbi Yehuda says, "What are you talking about? It's mina Torah." It's not. The Mishnah says, "Mishacharav Beis Hamikdash Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Shehei Yom Hanef Kulu Aser." Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai established that the day that you wave is the entire day is prohibited. And Rabbi Yehuda comes along and says, "V'lo min Torah Aser." Why do you need to establish a takana? It's also from the Torah. So they're arguing with each other. The answer is no. Rabbi Yehuda katoi. Rabbi Yehuda is mistaken. Rabbi Yehuda sounds like he's arguing. Rabbi Yehuda is mistaken. He thinks Rabbi Yochanan's arguing with him, but Rabbi Yochanan was not arguing with him. Who saw Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai midrabanan kamer? He thought Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai established a takana and was saying it was only rabbinic, and he was saying no, it's deoraisa velohi, but he was not correct. Midoraisa kamer. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was saying no, midoraisa. You can't eat even when there's no base. That means you can't eat it all day long. Yeah, v'hahiskin ketani. How do you read the Mishnah then? The Mishnah says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai rabbinically established it. So means my hiskin. What do we mean when he rabbinically established it? Dorash. He used his rabbinic prowess, and he read into the words of the Torah, the Hiskin, and he established what to do. Why did he have to do that? Because remember, up until that point, there was a Beis Hamikdash, so nobody thought, what do you do when there's no Beis Hamikdash, right? There's a Beis Hamikdash, so when the korban is brought, then you can eat it. Then he said, okay, now there's no Beis Hamikdash, what do we do? So he read into the Sukkim, and he used the rules of Drasha, and he said, Midoraisa, we don't eat it the entire 16th. But really, he agrees, Midoraisa, you don't eat it all 16th. And therefore, all the other opinions, the arguments that they have about whether you can eat it earlier, right, is established according to Rav and Shmuel and Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are all according to the other opinions. So you can't ask a question from Yochanan ben Zakkai about them. Okay.
Can I ask a question? I don't know if this is the right place or time, but
Yeah.
The title Rabban.
Yes. That's a Eretz Yisrael title, an earlier title from
Different than Rabbi, which is all.
Rabban. Yes, so Rebbe is an Eretz Yisrael type of Rabban. Is that a Nasi title?
Yeah, later title.
Is it a later title? Who has it later? Rabban Gamliel does. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai does. Who else has it after that? Rabbi Akiva doesn't, right?
I don't think so.
I'm gonna look at that. It's actually, I know the answer to that is in the introduction to the art scroll that we have over there. So
Right
take a
over
look.
there.
Correct.
Gemara's, right?
I remember reading it. Rav Papa v'Rav Huda Breder of Yeshua, Achli Chadash be'ursa de shitzar nagi shivsar. Okay, practice. Let's talk practical now. Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, they used to eat their chadash in the morning of the 16th, which was, in the morning, the nighttime, at the nighttime between the 16th and the 17th of Nisan, meaning the 16th is day 2 of Pesach. They waited until that entire day was finished, and then they eat it that night. Kasavri, they held Chodesh b'chutz la'aretz d'Rabbanan. They held that Chodesh, the prohibition of eating Chodesh outside of Eretz Yisrael, is only rabbinic. And now, u'esfeika lo cheshinan. Since it's a d'Rabbanan, we're going to be lenient. So therefore, we have a doubt, because, if you remember, day 1 of Pesach is the 15th of Nisan. Day 2 of Pesach is the 16th of Nisan. Okay? The 16th of Nisan is not Chol Moed in Chutz La'aretz. In Chutz La'aretz, we have a doubt if this is day 1 of Pesach again, remember? So we keep 2 days of Pesach. So therefore, they should have, if they were being worried about the day, whether it was the 16th whether today is the 15th or the 16th, they should have waited the 3rd day of Pesach, because that might have been day 2 of Pesach. Day 3 of Pesach could have been day 2 or day 3.
Where does Pesach Sheni come in?
Pesach Sheni does not come in. Pesach Sheni is a whole different discussion, right? Pesach Sheni is 30 days later. This is the 2nd day of Pesach, and the 3rd day of Pesach could be interchangeable. So what they said was, they held that that you're supposed to wait the entire 16th. Okay, so they waited the entire 16th, they didn't eat in the morning. But then, they didn't wait till the end of the 17th, because they said, since it's only a rabbinic prohibition in the first place, there's no need to worry about the suffix whether today is the 2nd day or the 3rd day, and therefore they were able to eat that night. Motzei Yom Tov, day 2 of Yom Tov, in Chutz La'aretz, they ate their chadash. Okay, they didn't have to worry about the extra day of Yom Tov. For Rabbanan Debei Rav Ashi, in the yeshiva of Rav Ashi, Achli B'tzafra de Shivsar. They ate their chadash the morning of the 17th. Right? Why? Kasavri Chadash b'chutz la'aretz d'oraisa. They held that Chadash outside of Eretz Yisrael was a Torah prohibition. Therefore, they held that the 16th could be the 17th. So they had to wait till day 3 of Pesach to eat their Chadash. However, they held Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai mid'Rabbanan kamar. They held that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was only making his establishment to wait only on a rabbinic level. So therefore, he established that they had, because Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said you have to wait and don't eat it the entire day of the 16th, which now that we're in Chutz La'aretz becomes the entire day of the 17th. But he established that you got to wait. That's on the day that you know is really the day of the Omer, not the day of suffix. So therefore, they held that really at sunrise you're allowed to eat the Korban Omer. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made the rule on a rabbinic level, according to their interpretation, that you had to wait the entire day. But that, being a rabbinic rule, was not established to include the 17th, which was already a doubt in Chutz La'aretz. So therefore, they held you can eat it 17th in the morning. Nobody held that you had to wait till the end of the 17th. Right, which could be a shita, right? Could be a shita that says it's d'oraisa, so you have to keep the extra day, and d'oraisa you can't eat it until the entire. According to Rabbi Yehuda, so we didn't hold like Rabbi Yehuda. We held like the Chachamim that it was that you only had to wait till the morning, but we were strict d'oraisa that eating chadash outside of Eretz Yisrael is a prohibition d'oraisa, so we waited till the 17th. Okay. Amar Ravina says. Amra Yereim, my mother told me, and I guess he never met his father, it sounds like. So his father must have died, right? That says Mesechus, it says bring here the notes that right, I guess this happens. They have other Gemaras that he does as well. Ravina didn't know his father. So he says, my mother told me, Avuch lo hava achil chodosh, ela be'urso deshivsar nagi timnesar. Your father would not eat his chodosh until the night following the 17th. So that means that he held both shitas, right? He held that you had to wait the entire 16th, mid'oraisa, and that Chodesh Bizman Hazeh and Chutz La'aretz is d'oraisa, and therefore you had to wait to the 17th, which could be the 16th, and you had to wait the entire 17th, so you had to wait till the night between the 17th and the 18th. To Savar Rabbi Yehuda, because he held like Rabbi Yehuda, that it was d'oraisa and not to eat it the whole day, and chayish l'sfeika, and he was worried that it was chodesh d'oraisa, and so he had to wait the entire 17th as well.
Same way, it's interesting. Like in the previous sheet, it's like you hold like Dirabag for one thing, but also D'oraisa at the same time.
Correct, because they're two separate arguments. Right? What is whether it's deoraisa in the first place to be chadash, or whether yoshin is deoraisa in the first place. Second issue is even if it's deoraisa, when was the prohibition deoraisa? Right? So his shita, his father, Ravina says, my father's shita was to be machmir all the way. Says the next Mishnah. Ha'omer ha'yamatir b'medina. Okay, the korban ha'omer was permitting people to eat the new crops in the whole country. But v'shtei alechem, the 2 loaves of bread that came on Shavuos, b'migdash. That's what permitted the new grain to be used in the Beis HaMikdash. They're still using old grain in the Beis HaMikdash for another 50 days. Ein mevi'im menachos ubikurim uminchas behema kodem la'omer. So you're not allowed to bring menachos and the first fruits of the year and the mincha of the nesachim of an animal from new grain until before the omer. V'im hevi puzzle, and if you do bring it before the Omer, it's puzzle. Kodem l'shtei alechem, if you use that product in the Beis HaMikdash before the shtei alechem, though, lo yavi, you're not supposed to. But im hevi kosher, if you do, it's kosher. Meaning, it's a mitzvah to wait till the shtei alechem. But if you do bring it, it's not really chadash anymore, it's now yashan, since it's permissible in the rest of the Eretz Yisrael, so it doesn't invalidate the korban. Okay, so that's what we're Yosef Rabbi Tarfon, the Kakashali. Rabbi Tarfon was sitting around and he had the following question. Ma bein kodem la'omer, lekodem shtei alechem. What is the difference between before the omer, which is puzzle, and before the shtei alechem, which is b'di'evid kosher? Right, it's called b'di'evid. If you did it, it's kosher. Ideally, you wait. If not, it's still kosher. So Amar lifan of Yehuda bar Nechemia. So Yehuda bar Nechemia heard him pondering this question, and he says, Loim amart kodem la'omer shekein luhutra michlal eitzel hedyo. He says, well, I'll tell you the difference. The difference is that before the omer, individuals can't eat it either. Right? Tomer kodem l'shtei alechem. You're going to say it's the same thing before the shtei alechem. Shehutra michlal eitzel hedyo. A regular individual is permitted to eat it. So therefore, it's kind of partially permitted, isn't it? Right? Once the regular people can eat it, it's not quite as prohibited before the shtei alechem. Shasak Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon, he didn't say anything about that. He said, oh, okay, good point. Sahavo panav shel Rabbi Yehuda ben Nechemia. Rabbi Yehuda ben Nechemia was very proud of himself. Glowing face, super happy with himself. He answered something Rabbi Tarfon, the great Rabbi Tarfon, didn't know. He felt very proud of himself.
That sounds kind of Bagavish.
Yes, Amar lo Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva says to him, Yehuda, tzavu panecha sheishavta al zakin. You got so excited because you answered a question that an elder had. Timahani al im tarich yamim. I would be astonished if you're going to live very long. He says that's not a good characteristic, right?
Wow.
And I don't know if it was a curse or an observation, right?
Wow.
Just an observation. Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'Rebbi Eloi. Rabbi Yehuda b'Rebbi Eloi said, Oso haperek. During that time, pros haPesachaya. It was 2 weeks before Pesach. That's when this story happened, right? Mamish, the time right now, right? 2 weeks before, in the 2 weeks before Pesach. When I went up to visit our Rebbe on Shavuos, it was their custom to be able to visit their Rebbes on the Shalosh Regalim, right? You visit your Rebbe. So I went up on Shavuos, Sha'alti Achrav, I asked about him, Yehuda ben Nechemia Heichan, who he says, where's Yehuda ben Nechemia? The Amruli, and they say, Niftar v'halachlo, he died. So he didn't even make it out of that season. He died during Sfiras HaOmer, which is interesting because it sounds like he was Rabbi Akiva was his Rebbe, because his Rabbi Akiva was talking to him. One of the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva who died during Sfiras HaOmer? Sounds like it, right? So, and why? Because he didn't have they didn't have Kavod Zevazeh, which seems to be exactly the story. So it sounds very consistent if that is the story. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, "L'divrei Rabbi Yehuda ben Nechemia." According to what Rabbi Yehuda ben Nechemia says, Nisachim bikurim shehikrivam kodem laomer ksherin. Let's say if I've got you're supposed to bring nisachim together with an animal. It's flour, but what about the wine that comes there? So grain is prohibited before the korban omer. Wine, grapes, has nothing to do with the korban omer. So if I bring wine from the new crop before the omer, it would be b'di'evet kosher, right? Because there's no obligation. Because it's permitted. Now, the Shtei Alechem permits all the new stuff that was made during the last year. So it sounds like you're not supposed to use the new wine, the fresh wine, until after the Shtei Alechem becomes a little bit older. But if the wine was brought, it sounds like since it was permissible to everybody else, it would be permitted if you brought it, but the evidence would be kosher.
It's an old wine, you have to let it breathe.
So yeah, but this is a wine that you just have to wait till Shtei Alechem, right? But it should be mutter. Pshita. So that seems like a fairly obvious observation, because you're right. His point was that once it becomes permissible to the population, if you bring it as a korban, even if not ideal, is acceptable. No. Mahu de tema, what would you have thought? There, by the Korban Omer, it's different. Why? Because there's another Korban which is making it permitted. It switches it over from being something prohibited to permitted. But the wine, whatever it is that's prohibiting it from being used in the Beis HaMikdash, there's nothing that is half permitting it. There's no Korban Omer that's saying, okay, now it's half permitted. It's just before the Shtei Alechem. So I might have thought, the Korban Omer itself helps the grain along a little bit, and half permits it. And since there's no Korban Omer corresponding to the wine remains prohibited until you get to the Shtei Alechem. Kamash Malan. So no, Kamash Malan. Kol Shekain Hacha, that Delutzer Klal, that for sure the wine is permitted. That's his point. No, it isn't. Has nothing to do with it. Since it's not prohibited at all, but it's still permitted. Okay, we're going to ask potentially a good time to take a break as we ever get the tefillin on, right? Is it good?
Yeah.
And we will ask four questions on the about how the Shtei Alechem works with the new mincha coming up.
Because it's Seder.
4 questions.
Yeah. Seder's coming up soon. Peter Kashas.
Yes, Seder is the first thing, right? 4 kashas, the Seder, those are all the things that are coming up, right?